Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Wrestling Underground podcast. We got a weird one for you this week. I'm your host, Chad, my co-host, the glorious one, Marcus. Marcus, firstly, how are you?
Yeah, man, we're back for a weird one. Somebody put out an opinion and it sent Chad into that Willy Wonka. I said, "Good day, sir." Type of move.
So I'm not going to name the account that this came off of because, quite frankly, um, I don't want to get any type of interaction. This individual posted a top 10 best high flyers in pro wrestling history. And on the list, which by the by was AI generated, it's just the worst fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't think Rob Van Dam has ever worn a singlet with himself on the singlet. And I've watched a lot of Rob Van Dam matches. But like you can look, like Ricochet doesn't look like Ricochet. Eddie Guerrero looks like he's 60. Rob Van Dam is missing half a face. You know, Matt Sydal, who you can't see at the bottom yet, it doesn't look like Matt Sydal there. Like, yeah, it's fucking atrocious. Now, we start at the top, and this whole looks bad. The order, the recognition, just everything. I do not believe when we talk about things like, I don't believe that you can realistically just sit here and say, hey, these are the best high flyers, because if you look at the list, they're all very different types of styles. And we'll go with 1 and 2 to start. Jeff Hardy at 1, Ricochet at 2. Ricochet is fundamentally more athletic than Jeff Hardy is crazy. And Jeff Hardy's pretty crazy. Jeff Hardy's not that athletic. Jeff Hardy is a risk taker. He's not an athlete. If you watch him throughout his career, he doesn't have the highest jumps. He's not the fastest. He's not the quickest. He doesn't even move that, looking back at the Cameron crew in the late 90s, early 2000s, which made up Gregory Helms, Shannon Moore, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Jeff was arguably the second least mobile of the four. If you watch Shane Helms in his prime, if you compared him to Jeff Hardy was standing still. Now, Matt was still worse, granted. But, like, Jeff's not athletic. Like, in the least bit. He's not athletic. So, I would went down to your you might find like a CPA CPA never an athlete. Shea is an extreme. He is a dope athlete. He's fast. He's quick. He's got some oomph to his burpees. He has better control of his body than Jeff Hardy ever did. But is Jeff Hardy a better high flyer than Rick? And it's hard. Jeff Hardy has moments that Rick would never do. Now, granted, days as like a thumbing of the nose. What he's known for are dangerous. Dare I say stupid. But if you're like, well, Rick never jumped off a ladder onto the floor, yeah. Jeff, and Ricochet completely different things. So does that make Ricochet, who's more athletic than Jeff, better than Jeff? No. Does it make Jeff, who's got bigger, more career-defining legacy moments in the area? No. This list is like that. Like, they are all vastly different wrestlers. Going through the list, you have Jeff Hardy at number 1. And again, this is a terrible fucking list. Don't take this without any real seriousness. It's fucking terrible. Ricochet at 2. Eddie Guerrero at 3. I'll be honest with you. If we're doing actual all-time great high flyers, Eddie Guerrero, Eddie, that's had nothing his aerial prowess. Now, he was good, but he wasn't even the best Hispanic wrestler in WCW in his time, let alone one of the 10 greatest of all time. Eddie was good. Eddie was not great at high flying. Eddie was not very technical. He was not very brawler. He was very good at all of it. If we're doing a scale, right? Like 1 is utter ass, that should be on a go. And 10 is the right? The Emerald Rush, something like that. If that's the scale, Eddie was a 7 across the board and everything, except charisma. You don't get wrestlers like Eddie. No one is that consistently good at everything, save for maybe number 8 on this list, which we'll get to. But Eddie was not known for the big moments. He was not known for being the ultra athlete. In fact, he was the most successful as a single wrestler. He had 5 pounds of muscle. Had lost all of his, I shouldn't say all of it. He had greatly seen a reduction in his, he was no longer the same linear mobile athlete he was in WCW. He was bulkier, or he still had control of his body. He would do that top rope senton, or not top rope senton, right? When he pulls himself up the top rope and lands onto the mat and do that like slide, little glide, where he leaps over and glides off. He is up. But like that was the biggest aspect of stuff when he was the most popular. He's not. He's not a top 10 promo guy. You could argue that because some of the stuff was fantastic. Not flyer. Number 4, you got Rob Van Dam. Definitely on the list. Is he number 1? We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to do the full list. I will post one at Nerdcorp on Twitter, NRDCOP, later on this week as I think about it. But Rob Van Dam, I think, is the only guy so far that we've covered to be called a flyer. No one on this list could as consistently go end to end in the ring with the power and strength that Rob Van Dam. He would go up in the right-hand corner of a wrestling ring and jump to the left-hand corner on the same side. I would be shocked if he could almost get across the ring, like at one end. Like that would, he probably could. He was physically stronger, dynamic, athletic. He wasn't the same type of quickness or speed that we see from a lot of guys. Some of them later. But he was the most powerful guy. You gotta ask yourself, does that matter? So, there's a lot of options on the list, even on the actual list. Number 5 is Rey Mysterio. He was vastly different high flyer. He would jump to the top rope. A lot of his stuff was on the middle rope, the top rope. He would do these contortionist acts where he would jump up on the guy, swing his legs around, tie his feet together, and do like a takeover. Ray really did a lot of that kind of work. It wasn't so much the athletic high flying stuff. It was the body control as you wrap yourself around ropes and wrap around he didn't do a big press. He didn't do a senton top. He didn't do a forward. He didn't do anything you correlate with your traditional high flyer. He would bounce off the rope and jump on you. That's a lot of his moves. Completely different than everyone we've seen so far on the list, even from Eddie Guerrero. So this is better. I wouldn't say that he's a flyer in that regard. We're talking about guys like Jeff Hardy and Ricochet, who top rope do these bombastic, dynamic leaps and bounds and dives onto the floor. Some of that, but that wasn't Ray's game. His finisher was a 619. He was more a guy who treats the wrestling ring like less like someone jumping to new heights. Then we have number 6, Logan Paul. He's not in the conversation. If you think Logan Paul is a great high flyer, you have been fed it. You have been fed, and I cannot take you seriously. If you look at Logan Paul, you're the guy who watched the WWE documentary. They wouldn't lie to me, but Logan Paul. Number 7 is Javion. Is it Javion? Javion. Mark, is it Javion Evans or Jevin Evans? Because I'm pretty sure it's Javion Evans, right? I've lost Marcus for the moment. Pretty sure the AI slot got it. We're going to do a Google check. Yeah, it's JE''VON. So the guy didn't even spell Javion's name right in the AI slop of it all. Dynamic, athletic, one of the more interesting and unique high flyers the WWE has. He has a slighter frame than most, but it allows him to kind of play into the bouncy gimmick of it all. So that's pretty cool. But, is he a top 10 guy all time? No. He may not even be a top 10 guy in the company he works for currently. Now, he's got time. Body of work will obviously say one way or another, but as of right now, no. Especially not over someone like AJ Styles, who lands in at number 7. Or, sorry, number 8. AJ Styles, quite literally, in his prime, was one of the 5 best in-ring workers and 5 best high flyers simultaneously. The dude did the Fosbury flop. He did the spiral tap. Whatever you think of Ricochet historically, AJ Styles was as good from like 2000 to probably 2008. I would say that 8-year stretch, AJ Styles was on par with any high flyer in the world. Purely based off of what we saw. So he's definitely much higher on this list than Javion Evans or Logan Paul. Then we got Will Ospreay at number 9. If you have Will Ospreay at number 9 all time, you've never watched a Will Ospreay match. Before the neck and back injury started to pile up and he started changing style, I think Will Ospreay may have been the most technically sound, most athletically gifted high flyer I've ever seen. Flat out remarkable what he was able to do. He was someone who, in his prime, when he was more, willing to go there, could do things no one else was doing, or had ever match with Ricochet, quite literally. If you got Ricochet too, you need to have Ospreay either 1 or 3 to be because these guys were copies of what one of them could do. And I would arguably say that Ospreay carried more and was a little bit more powerful. And that's compared to him to Ricochet in his prime, when he was arguably the best high flyer in the Indies. So, number 10 is Evan Bourne, Matt Sydal. No. Historically, you could argue during his time before he broke his foot, Evan Bourne might have been a top 10 guy. I wouldn't say even in his prime he was a top 10 guy in the world. I certainly wouldn't say that Evan Bourne is a top 10 guy all. I wouldn't even dare to make that comment. He is because whoever made this list doesn't know this list or who's on it, and has no idea what the world of wrestling looks like aside from the WWE. Because there are so many guys historically that should be talked about. And we're going to talk about some. I don't want to build a top 10 list without giving it some real thought. But I would say that the list includes guys at least with Rob Van Dam, AJ Styles, Ricochet, for sure. So I think going from there, we can start building a list a bit. I think we're having a little bit of technical issues with Marcus. Marcus, can you hear me? Seems like we are having technical issues with Marcus. Let's see if we just reset the call. Marcus, can you hear me now? Like we're having some issues. This is a sticky wicket. Marcus, if you can hear me, end your side of the call as well, and we'll just see if we can reconnect. All right. Now I can hear something.
Good.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Oh, what a. All right. Well, we're going to keep rolling. That's what we do. Welcome back, by the way. So, before we get into who I think should be in consideration, because I don't know if you heard me, I'm not building the top 10 list. Not without some serious deep thought and look into it. Before we get into who I think should be at least considered historically, what is your takeaway from this top 10? What is going on with this top 10 in your mind? What do you think he got right? What do you think he got wrong? If anything,
Yes, it's interesting because we were talking. I mean, like all the names you said that mentioned that was right. Obviously, AJ, Osprey, Ricochet. Who else did you say?
Osprey, Ricochet, Styles, for sure, it would be on my list. Historically.
Yeah, absolutely same. But when it comes to guys like Jeff Hardy, like you said, it wasn't a high fly for him, it was a risk taker. If you're viewing the person that came up with it as a complete novice, what do you think is causing the clear conflation with that? Because seeing somebody do one move that requires a degree of difficulty from a high point over and over again does not necessarily dictate or dictate them, yeah, being a high flyer. So you think that's the disconnect?
I think the disconnect is that this is one of the few spaces that have millions of fans and no real experts.
Yeah.
And I think it allows experts to pop up and seem to try to have a conversation. And because fans treat it, as silly, kind of ashamed. Really put the same type of emotional investment. Jeff Hardy is a flyer in the sense that Jeff Hardy has more in common with and Vader than he does Ricochet. Vader did the double splash off the corner. Bounce off. Jeff Hardy does, or did, for the most part, pretty consistent big. He can do that twisting heel kick, which is right, like just Jeff would twist himself upside down. He would and then he would do the some other guys would do that was for the most part what Jeff would do in a normal match. Sometimes he'd jump over the top of the floor. Sometimes he'd go for some type of diving schmaz. But for the most part, it was those three moves. I don't know how you can look at Jeff Hardy and go, oh, he's definitely a better high than Will Ospreay, than Prime AJ Styles, than Ricochet. Jeff might make a top 10 list does. He's swan-tied off the cage, swan-tied off the ladder. He's been thrown through, thrown on, and thrown off about everything. He slid down, if I remember correctly, a handrail. Wouldn't say that was high flying. But when we start talking about, like, just doing simple moves every match to a high flyer, well, we need to talk about that. And I don't know if I can safely sit here and say that, because, like, then you start asking yourself, like, well, Cody Rhodes does a splash. Does that make him? And also does that bounce off the road? What is it called? The disaster kick?
Yeah, he also does a moonsault.
Like, Cody Rhodes, high flyer? Here, let's go. Before 50. Hit it off the fucking cage out of the guts. He landed. In fact, Kurt Angle might be the greatest athlete in pro wrestling history. He almost did one up the cage on Ken Anderson's arm. They broke it.
Yeah, oftentimes missed. Yeah.
So, it's like, this is where we have to have that kind of conversation. I think Jeff Hardy has more in common with your run-of-the-mill brawlers than he does anyone else. I think Jeff Hardy has more in common with Tommy Dreamer than he does Rey Mysterio. But because the WWE was so devoid of actual athletes in the 2000s, and you had guys like Jeff Hardy who could do a little something. Everyone's like, he's such an death-defying character. He's such a big, risk taker. When he got in the ring in 2004 with AJ Styles, when Jeff made his TNA debut, I swear to God, it was AJ was wrestling with the broomstick with how slow Jeff was in comparison. That's not a knock. Jeff is not a high-class level athlete. He's athletic enough. I made that CPA basketball comparison. I think that's apt. AJ Styles, according to a lot of people, thought that if he had stuck with gymnastics, he could have. How athletic AJ Styles is. And AJ made Jeff look slow.
Yeah, Jeff got that crazy white boy thing down to a T.
He does. And listen, none of this is but we're not talking about, one of the most depth-defying, one of the most hardcore, one of the most, charismatic wrestling history. Those are what he's in the conversation. Is he one of the greatest high flyers? I would say first. Not in the top, maybe top 25. Definitely top 30.
Where would you how would you view somebody like talking about going to throwbacks, or somebody like a S.A. Rios in comparison?
Oh, S.A. in terms of just raw skill, S.A. Rios makes Jeff Hardy look stupid. S.A. Rios was one of the more fundamentally gifted workers the WWE ever had. And I need to kind of understand. Pro wrestling is not an easy avenue to talk in terms of talent or success or top guys, because there's so many elements that go into how anyone you look at Hollywood. You look at Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington. They basically play different variants of none of them some of the best of their time. You look at someone like Sam Rockwell, who never does he has the ability to fold himself into a character a lot more easily than anyone else I just mentioned. Yet we don't talk about him to the same level that we would the other guys in terms of success, big budget movies, leading man potential, because he's more nuanced and he's not as But you look at wrestling, you have that going on. Plus, you also have to incorporate their athleticism. But we've seen enough standard athletes become super successful that athleticism alone is going to be the driving force. If it was, we'd all be talking about how great Sean O'Hare and Mark Jindrak were. Specifically, Mark Jindrak, who I think at one time, I may be giving him too much credit, but at one time had one of the highest vertical leaps in wrestling. The dude had the ability. He was already like 6'6". Like dunking was not hard for him, but like he was a star in the making of basketball before he realized he had pro wrestling. Great athletes of all time. Terrible. Wasn't an Olympian. Anarazu, multiple time Olympian, multiple time UFC champion. Not multiple time, but one time. And like, her matches were fine if they were ever. So we have to consider, acting, marketability, charisma, in-ring work, athleticism, making a style of their own. Like, say what you will about Rey Mysterio and how he kind of, goes about it, his in-ring work compared to everything we're going to be talking about. His in-ring work style was very different to him. He wasn't going to do a rotating 450 off the top rope. He wouldn't do a shooting star press. But what he did was flawless. He moved so brilliantly. But is that a high flyer? I mean, we only classify wrestling into 3 categories. And I think we need to do a better job with how we classify, because I think Rey Mysterio was closer to Dean Malenko than he was Ricochet at his prime. Rey did a lot of arm drags, did a lot of toe holds. He did a lot of moves where he would go up, bring the guy down via some type of headlock. But because he was 5'0" $125, and would sometimes do a seated senton splash off the middle rope, or off the middle of the rope, everyone's like, he's a high flyer. Is he, though? And then we have this conversation about what constitutes a high flyer, because there's so many elements to being a high flyer. I would say that Rey is more of a high-flying technical than he was a genuine flyer. Because he wasn't doing crazy moves off the top rope. Everything he did off the top rope was standard. Hell, for the longest time, he did a splash as his finisher in the WWE. So, like, is he the same as Will Ospreay? Fuck no. Will Ospreay makes him look stupid. But does that make Rey Mysterio not an all-time great? Of course not. He is. Just how do we identify this? Like, how do we, truly look at what makes a high flyer? Because right now, when you look at these last 3 names, Jeff Hardy, Ricochet, Rey Mysterio, they are all fundamentally different in how they execute their styles. Fundamentally different. And it's impossible to sit here and say, well, one's bigger than the other, because they're all pretty fucking good, just vastly different. So when we talk about how we, compare wrestlers in this sport, it's so fucking hard. It's not as easy as just looking at it, at like a was he any good? Well, he had 1,600 yards, and J.J. McCarthy was a fucking quarterback. So yeah, he's pretty fucking good, right? In basketball, it's pretty easy to see who's good. Well, LeBron, only had like 35-year-old Junior Skouskis and a 4'8", Mo Williams. He took his team to the Eastern Conference Final, to the NBA Finals in 2007. I don't know if he's any good. Really? Because that seems like something that someone who's only pretty good at this game would be able to do. And you look at someone like Paulo Banchero, who's got all the stats in the world, and the Magic still have losing. Is he any good? Probably not. If he was, they wouldn't suck. So when we talk about wrestling, we have to understand that there are variables that often don't get talked about when people try to break down and have conversations about who the top 10, who the top 20, who's the best of all time really is, because there's so many things that go into it that we don't pay attention to or don't accurately talk enough about. And that's what I'm hoping to do tonight. Expand the conversation, be a little bit more nuanced in how we look into things. Well, that being said, I do have some names. I think I have some names historically. These are not the only names. Marcus, I'm telling you, these may not even be the names that would be on my top 10 list when I ultimately do make it. These are some names that I do think should be included. I will. These guys are in consideration. These guys are not they're in consideration. They might be in the top 20. They're in consideration. They're not all of the names, but they are some of the names. So, Marcus, the first name I want to talk about that I think should be on this list, and I want you to agree or disagree, is Rob Van Dam. I do think Rob Van Dam fundamentally is one of the 10 greatest high flyers. He will be on my list. Like, fundamentally, I think he is the most powerful athlete we've ever seen as a quote unquote high flyer. You know, his ability to cover great distances, his strength, the uniqueness in his kicks. He was truly one of a kind. And even to this day, there's never been another wrestler like him. Would Rob Van Dam be in contention for your top 10?
Absolutely. There are a few people who were more fun to watch. I didn't even watch him in ECW. Um, just call him WWE, and he truly, like you said, was one of a kind. Still is one of a kind. Anytime I get to play in my Day of Reckoning games, I always pick him because he's fun. Just the way he got to the top rope, he literally jumped. He would jump just straight to the top rope. Um, don't even get me started on like just the point of distance that he used to cover even doing that 5 star, which I don't even want to imagine what long term damage that potentially did. Um, but yeah, Rob Van Dam is like you said, he's just one of a kind. If you're doing a top flyer list and he never comes on there, you kind of just disingenuous, ultimately. Like yeah, but yeah, Rob is an absolute legend.
Legend, unique, style beyond style. He's just one of those guys that I think did a lot with what he had to offer.
Absolutely.
Rob's one of those guys that I think when you look at CrossFit training, brings a lot of validity to that conversation because I know a lot of people always just think about Rob Van Dam as a stoner. But Rob Van Dam was an accomplished martial artist. It's one of the reasons why he took the name because he would get a haircut that made him look like Rob Van Dam. I think either similar or did the same thing. I think Rob, did the same type of karate. Let's see. We can look this up. We have the internet. We have the ability. Let's see. Rob Van Dam. Grew up in Battle Creek. I didn't know about this. He was Ted DiBiase's kid.
He's a what?
He was used, and when he was 16 years old, in a Ted DiBiase skit back in the day.
Mm.
I'm trying to see where his martial arts is listed. Because it wasn't nothing. He was an accomplished strength and conditioner, plus his stretching. I think he quite literally wrote instruction manuals on how to properly stretch and whatnot. The Van Dam name was given to him by Ron Slinker, by the way. Something he came up with. Very good. Wrestling, trainer. Van Dam is a trained kickboxer and martial artist. He grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan, and studied martial arts at two dojos. He received instruction in karate, taekwondo, aikido, kickboxing, and what I'm not familiar with, kaiju kenbo. And then in 1990, he was second in the Kalamazoo heavyweight Tuckman contest. So, and he was also a staunch bodybuilder. So, yeah, he had a lot going on as far as a talent goes. He's on my list. Another name definitely on my top 10 list is going to be AJ Styles. If you've only watched him since the end of his TNA run to now, you would be a little surprised. You would be a little surprised to find out that AJ Styles is probably in his prime at any Highlander you can name. When the X Division was on the come up, and you had a babyface a little bit older elite scorer, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Styles the entire division. He did the ring that took so much control and awareness that you could not deny his gift for this industry. he was Ricochet before Ricochet. Now, I think Ricochet may have an extra. Him and Will Ospreay may have an extra element of athleticism to them than AJ Styles had. But if Styles did anything better than anyone, it was his staunch control of his own body. He never over rotated. He didn't land awkwardly. He didn't do anything that injured himself or others. He took one of the biggest spots at, I think, Lockdown 2006. If I remember correctly, it was Rhino, I want to say, or Ron Killings grabbed, or maybe it was AJ got grabbed by his wrists and flung off the top of the cage onto, if I remember correctly, a table. He was involved in TNA's scaffold match, the what was it? The Platform X? No, I can't remember what it's called. He faced Rhino and James Storm. Sorry, Rhino was Styles and then later James Storm. And Styles' was fantastic because he crawled down and into the truss underneath the setup. Yeah, that's hard as hell to do. So I don't think we can have a list. A true, genuine AJ Styles. He's definitely in my top 10 for sure. Marcus, would he be in yours?
You don't call the man phenomenal for nothing. There are a few people that in all wrestling that truly have lived up to their moniker, even when they weren't necessarily in their prime more than guys like Rob and AJ. Like AJ, the stuff he was doing in TNA in those early years, like I said, he when I brought me to TNA because one of my childhood friends was talking about this guy so much because I was just to be on the brain at the time. And that was kind of my wrestling horizon at the time, sadly. And then friends just kept talking about AJ Styles, AJ Styles. Who was the guy in AJ Styles, this other company that's not WWE. And then all it literally took me was one time to see him. And that was the end of that story. I've been watching them in TNA, watched TNA ever since, and then continue to expand my wrestling horizon. But yeah, the minute I saw him, it's like a freaking superhero in real time. And even as he's gotten older and gotten away from the more riskier things, as you do when you slow down, you can no longer to the point where I think he said he doesn't do the bar tap anymore because he forgot how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, like his highlight reel is insane. And like I said, there are a few people that live up to the monikers, like one of a kind and a phenomenal one. So yeah, I don't know how you bring up anybody that's even in the realm of that conversation. Don't bring up AJ Styles. Like his early years in TNA is Hall of Fame worthy by itself.
Agreed. I think another name that has to be on the list, although again, different type of style, is Rey Mysterio. I think what he does is vastly different than everyone else. Not so much in the vein of Lucha Libre. If you watch any type of, CMLL, anything old school AAA, not now, but something that, had historic roots, you'll see a lot of what Rey does done to a smaller scale. Rey is considerably small, and I don't think people really genuinely realize he is very short. He's shorter than a lot of luchadors. So you don't get guys who do a lot of the same things that he does because they just don't have the agility or the nimbleness required to do it. Some guys can. Some guys have exceeded him, and we're going to talk about one or two of those later. But what Rey was able to do with this technical, high fly technical style, where he used a lot of holds and not special attacks. That sounds stupid, but his unique attacks with his kicks, his drop kicks, his ability to do takeovers and what have you with different parts of his body, head scissors, arm drag takeovers, all that stuff. I think you can say he's a high flyer in that sense, but I think his style is, again, closer to a ground, mat-based technical style. But I still think that he has enough and panache, those two together, to qualify on this list, even if I don't think he's authentically just
Yeah,
a straight up high flyer.
yeah. I mean, saying, look, when you Rey Mysterio in that prime when he wasn't played by injuries was a one man show. Um, and that really applies to all three of these guys that we deep mentioned: Mysterio, AJ, and Rob. Just just absolute marvels to watch. Um, Particularly when Rey Mysterio was younger. I mean, he still put on a hell of a show now. Thankfully, with the I was about to say gene therapy. But what's the I'm looking for the stem cell. Yeah, thankfully with the stem cells, he's been able to extend that. But yeah, for sure, Rey Mysterio is definitely. I think, like you said, you perfectly. I think laid out like the full composition of what he does in the ring. Not just straight up and down one thing, but yeah, you definitely got to put Ray on that list. And his diminutiveness has only, I think, aided in uh, that perspective of just kind of isolating him to that high fly of it all because it looks even more so because of his size.
Agreed. All right. Let's see. I think I lost you at the tail end, but I agree with you. I think Ray is a unique that even if he doesn't meet to the certain standards of the other guys, he makes the list. He might get
Yeah.
pushed out on the back end of the top 10, but I think he's at least in the conversation for it. I think Ricochet also is on that list. I think he's definitively a top 7 guy. Before I even
Mm-hmm.
start thinking, like, I'm not thinking about, Rich Swan, Swerve. I'm thinking, well, you got Tiger, you got Tiger Master, you got Eddie Guerrero. Granted, I would never put Art Barr on the list because he's degenerate. You got Ghosts, you got so many guys in this door. Guys, we have so many guys. And we're not even thinking about Ricochet's or even get into the historical relevance and athletic nature and gifted talents that exist beyond the simple concept. Before I guarantee probably be higher. What Ricochet has done over the last 16 years, give or take, is transcendental. It's transformative. It's incredible. He was able to have matches that broke the internet with Will Ospreay. Broke the internet so bad that Vader came out of retirement just so he could fight Ricochet. Will Ospreay. Remember that? Like, Ricochet was doing so much body work that he was pissing off vets to get back in the ring so they could show the young whippersnappers how it was done. If you get to talk about that. Plus, he's super athletic. Plus, he's got a great. He is one of those guys who historically has shined work. He went from being the face of a promotion to being big enough to say Ring of Honor to then being missing about 7. To all of a sudden having to come back here to remember top 7 guaranteed. Guaranteed. Thoughts on Ricochet? Yes, no. I think Marcus may have walked away for the moment. There
I
he
mean,
is. There you are.
Gonna do this. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, he's pissed people off across the internet on several levels over the years. But certainly with he was just one of those characters. If you found out he was mute at the time when all that was going on, you didn't care because he was just that. Like stuff he was doing, the stuff he can still like to do if he wanted to was insane. I mean, just being able to do a double backflip is nuts. Fosbury flop, like you name, like all the stuff we talked about with AJ Styles, you name it, he was doing it twice. And yeah, I mean, to see him go from like absolute, thick, skinny to bulking up and that whole thing and still being able to do so much of that stuff, he's definitely solidified himself in that space. And it's been really cool to see how he's transitioned from place to place when he's gone. What he did as Prince Puma, I don't think probably gets enough credit. Um, and yeah, yeah, I think Ricochet, looking at that list, even as crazy as it was, putting Ricochet on there did feel like a no-brainer. So absolutely.
Ricochet also has some overrated in wrestling. If you've never seen Ricochet with hair, you're seeing it now on screen, obviously. But like, holy damn, the boy was going bald since he was like 12, and he would use a straight iron to get his hair flat. And golly, does he just look awkward? Like, look at this. Like, what emo band is he trying out for? Like, come the fuck on. For him, bald is beautiful because it's a lot better. Speaking of a lot better, and much like who probably, though I can't say for sure, got stem cell therapy, is Mr. A Wrestler of the Year for not only the Wrestling Observer magazine in 2025, but the Wrestler of the Year for the Wrestling Underground. In terms of how he moves, and this is comparisons that I think helps exemplify and highlights why we need to have a more broad conversation about the specifics that go along into the styles of a wrestler. Because again, Mystico is not someone who does a lot of big flips, but he does a lot of stuff that is based off the body. Like he does spins and twists and what have you. You know, crucifix pins. Scissor stuff. He's always looking to find a way to get a guy off his seat through some type of body movement, through some type of twisting and contorting of his own body to bring the other person down. His finisher for the longest time was that spin wraparound armbar. He'd go up like almost like he was going for a float over DDT and then like do an extra revolution. Then he'd come down and put the guy in an armbar. Fantastic. I think it was called like the La Mystica or the La Fantastica or something like that. But I think Billy Kidman did more top rope stuff than Mystico did. And to Billy Kidman. To gain the most weight between the WCW and WWE runs, his hair and somehow improved his music, and then somehow became a worse wrestler. He'd be on that list. It's a very specific list, but he'd be on that list. So Mystico has a very unique element to him. I think one of the things that keeps me of all time that 4 year stretch or so in WWE where it was one of the signings not by a company but by a slowing down a trajectory in his career that I think was going to be an all-time great. Now it still could be. He could still be one of the best of all time. And I mean, like, I'm talking about best. I'm talking about like one of the 20. I think it's Mil Mascaras. I think you could argue Blue Demon, and then him. But he was on the road. He was on the path to something. Marcus, I know you're not as familiar with Mystico as I am, and I know that Lucha Libre is not as something that you've consumed as I have. So maybe, do you think he would? And if not, do you think it would hinder him from making your list if he doesn't?
If he did what?
If he didn't make the list of your list, why do you think Mystico wouldn't? But if he does, why do you think he does?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when he first came to WWE on the Sin Cara, even then, not having seen him before that, and just seeing what he, I mean, some stuff going around, I could tell he was holding back, and I think that says a lot because that's why they brought him in. 'Cause they like they do so many people to almost like cut his knees off at the same time. You remember what they did? They gave him the lights. You know, I don't know if the communication was there. Certain guys may have been able to keep up. Certain people couldn't. The styles was just off. Like, but I could tell he was holding back and being held back. The fact that, to your point, as much as you consistently talked about him, that he's gotten back to any form in any way coming off of that horrendous Sin Cara run, just speaks to the undeniable talent. Cream, like we always talk about, Cream always rises to the top. And just seeing some of the stuff that I have seen, um, yeah, I think you definitely got to put him on that list. I mean, he's before. It's why they brought him to the company, and he didn't really get to show any of it. So, I think it definitely warrants putting him on the list. And I don't know. I mean, honestly, can you really have a high flyers list and not put any luchadors on it?
I don't think
So,
you can.
yeah,
I think you have to. At least
yeah,
some of them, right? At least some of them got to be on the list. Not the whole list, but
yeah,
some of them. Um,
yeah.
I think a named individual who should be in consideration that is not on the list, but I think absolutely should be is Kenny Omega. I think he's a better athlete than half the list got on that fucking AI slop nonsense. But I think he falls into the AJ Styles category, and I think part of the issue for why we don't talk more about him in this regard is because his light heavyweight work was at a time in New Japan where a lot of Western fans weren't watching New Japan yet. And I think because if you look at the spectrum right here, if you really want to look at the advancement for how the benefits that come with streaming and internet content being more readily accessible, all of these K-pop um, happening in mass, say 2016, about a decade ago. And when they started to do a lot more English content stuff, it became a lot more on streams with about stuff. When you and you put some English of something that's happening, it becomes a lot more digestible. And it's going on. If you don't know the story, you don't have the same appreciation that you could have otherwise. And when New Japan do more came New Japan, embraced New Japan, and got into New Japan, but by that point, Kenny had already moved up to doing his main event runs with guys like and all the other matches with. So there was a lot of stuff that he was already starting to do at that point. He had a match with Styles, now that I think. He was already doing a bunch of stuff though, but he had already changed his style as much as Ospreay has done recently. But at the same time, and he was 30, 31 now. So to see Will Ospreay doing that era, Kenny, he was doing a lot of his high flying lightweight stuff. If you're a newer fan, one of the better athletes and one of the better high flyers that I think you see kind of like the trace amounts, like if you will, of Kenny's light heavyweight. He was so much more before that. He wasn't the same high flyer that Ospreay is, but I would liken him more than with how Kenny in terms of like they were human instead of going to the top of the rope, they were doing all their stuff from going above their opponents. It was always like tight net on the mat and win within. That's for Kenny Sharp as well. Plus, full high angle. I don't know senton, but that some would just go way out for it, tuck in. Kenny 25. You could make an argument that he's not known for his high players are. Would you say that he could be, or would you say that he doesn't qualify enough as a high flyer in your mind?
I think because people got to remember he started off at, like, to your point that they talked about. He started off as a junior in New Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and before that he was doing stuff on the Indies and whatnot. And like obviously AJ Styles started off in the X division and then he rose to problems. A lot of I think them, their style changed as the competition elevated. Because it really got to a point where you really just had to get in between the ropes and really just outlast Okada. That's really what it ended up coming down to a lot of times when he was on that legendary run. Um, and you could only do so much jumping here, jumping over this, jumping over that. Really, you had to get him into the middle of that ring and just outlast him. And so many people just couldn't do it. And eventually Kenny did. Um, but yeah, I think he's definitely in consideration for that because it's not that he can't do it; he just doesn't necessarily do it. And with everything he's kind of gone through, you can understand why. But you saw flashes of that brilliance when he won in that match. Certainly when he came back against was it Osprey when he came back?
Yes.
He had that match with New Japan.
When he came back recently,
I know he did Gabe Kidd, but who was that before that he
yeah, I think
stunned?
it was Osprey.
Yeah, it was Osprey. Um, so yeah, you saw that brilliance, when he came back against him. So it was yeah, he's just that guy. He's one of the better, most well-rounded guys you're gonna have, and when he's healthy, really feels like nobody can touch him. He's absolutely in that conversation. You talk about top guys in AEW, it's him, Swerve, Osprey, um, you know, guys like that. Even at their 50%, they're better than most guys at their 100. Kind of in that Tanahashi level. So yeah, absolutely.
Another name that I think makes the list for sure, Will Osprey. We talked about some of his biggest rivals being Kenny and of course Ricochet. Watching him in his prime before the back and the neck injury started to pile up, forced him to change his style, which I still think right now he's one of the 30 greatest in-ring performers of all time. Just right now, even with his changes, I think he's found a great way to maximize his athleticism while minimizing the impacts that it had against him. Um, I think historically, though, especially with his run in New Japan, you can't deny that he was one of the best ever to do it. Obviously makes the list. Does he make the list for you? I think Marcus.
But well,
Will Ospreay make the list for you?
yeah, it's not even debate. Come on, man. The boy called Bitter the goat for a reason. Um, if you don't like everything you may do or have done, outside the ring or what have you, before those injuries, it was like, and several guys that we've mentioned have done this too, but it was like he was making the air his personal lackey in top form, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just marvel to watch. Like he's one of those guys. Like even if there was nothing in doing more than just watching him execute the moves, not necessarily in a match, he's that good. You know, they call him the aerial assassin, and again, somebody that absolutely lives up to the moniker. You know, even at times where it feels like they couldn't or shouldn't, they go above and beyond. You know, he's wrecked his body living up to it, but he's got classics all over the industry because of
Agreed.
it.
All right. Now we start getting into, I think, what I would consider to be some of the more historical guys, but I think guys who deserve to be on this list regardless. First one up, you mentioned before. Just in terms of what he could do in the ring, he was not the best of athletes, and that's something that you're going to see with the older generation of high flyers. You can't compare them to the modern guys. But I think you can at least have the conversations that for what they did in the ring among fellow timely people of their generation, their impact on the genre and on the industry, I think we have to include it. And I think Ultimo Dragon is definitely one of those. People do Acai Moonsault in part because Ultimo Dragon, he was so good. He got the ability to name moves after himself. He may not be
Yep.
someone that right now you look and go, oh yeah, he's on par with anyone today. So, I probably view guys who were more impactful on the industry than Ultimo Dragon. You've already mentioned him. I know he's probably on your list.
Mm-hmm.
What about Dragon
Absolutely.
makes him on your list?
I mean, to me, he was another one that was well rounded and just, I mean, because this generation a lot of time get locked in on one move, or if they see a guy do three dives and all of a sudden he's a high fly. But I really feel like he was like well rounded. Obviously he had a fantastic look. Wasn't the biggest guy, didn't necessarily need to be the biggest guy, but he had such a varied array of moves. And like you said, that acai moon. So you can innovate something like that. That just puts you at a different tier because it's just so hard to call yourself an innovator anything in this art form because everything's been done twice, recycled and done again. In a lot of instances done to death. So yeah, he was just doing it like you said, comparable. Yeah, of course, by today's metrics after everything we've seen, but back then he was in that one of a kind um, conversation. So I think you talking about historical context. You have to bring up names like Ultimo Dragon, um, because they really were something to watch. The presentation, all of it. It all matters. So yeah.
Speaking of presentation, we got to go with one of the most well presented wrestlers of all time, and that is Jushin Thunder Liger. From New Japan to TNA to Ring of Honor to WWE for that one night, and so many other places. Liger proved what he could do in the ring. He's another guy that I would say wasn't supposed but he was daring enough to do things that other people with size, stature, and credibility weren't willing to or able to do. I think this is a clear example of the difference between being a great athlete and being a great wrestler. Liger really only ever did. He may have done. I vaguely remember him doing something close to a 450 once. Give me a real memory of this. But for all the matches I've ever seen with Liger, it was more like a Steamboat style, where there's a lot of grace and perfection in his movements. Some splashes, jumped off the top rope, but he wasn't doing anything truly dramatic. But he was hitting things that I think people at the time were astounded by it because you have to remember in the late 90s, early 90s, John was like a single the head with the guy do a smash at pollution. What he was able to do, his ability to bring up himself and really define what is expected out of those guys, I think is historically significant. And it definitely goes down as having one of the best looks of all time. Plus, his stuff in New Japan and WCW specifically, it just fantastic. And he's super fucking charismatic. Granted, most people would never know that because he doesn't speak English. But the man is. He's so charismatic. New Japan often has him as one of their lead color commentary guys because people love him so much. Look, great style, great aesthetic. He took an anime that really wasn't going anywhere and turned it into one of the more impressive looks you've ever seen. His ability to look cards and submissions with a certain air to him, on top of his devilness, I think helps truly solidify him as one of the few names that deserve to be in the top 10 of a high flyer, top high flyer list. Does he make you?
Absolutely, and for every reason that you listed, and it kind of harkens back to what you talked about with Styles earlier, but also not necessarily extensively because he didn't necessarily need to do that. It was clean, Didn't need to be these crazy things, but the body control, um, the flawlessness of execution, the consistency of it, along with, like I said, the charisma, the presentation. He looked like somebody you should be watching. With the suits and the whole presentation, and he followed that up in the ring. And he's an absolute legend, and Japan certainly knows how to retire. But yeah, Liger is just, again, he's just one of those names. If you don't bring him up in that conversation, you're being disingenuous, and I'm sure a lot of fans over here will be like, "Well, I never watched." I'm like, and that's a huge part of the problem. While your list is so, and I get it, you can only talk from your scope and your perspective and vantage point. But if you really go down that list that kind of kicked off this conversation, so many of those guys got influenced by Jushin Thunder Liger. And if they say they didn't, they lying. So if they say they didn't and they being genuine about it, they were inspired by a guy who was inspired by Jushin Thunder Liger. So
it wasn't the 450 as the shooting star that they used to a lot. But started the States in the late 90s, he had kind of retired, or at least was doing it less regularly. If you remember, at that point, it'd be almost 17 years into his career. He started in 84, retired in 2020.
Yeah.
By the by, I do 100% blame Jushin Thunder Liger for the pandemic. If Liger did not retire in 2020, the pandemic never would have happened. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, man. That's the most outlandish / best take I've heard.
What would have been Vargas, he would have been. I'm not taking any look otherwise. It's a little wild. Did he have a match in 2025 with Pizza Cave? Apparently he faced off with Joe at Pixelcade. 25. That's weird. Hilarious, but weird. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about, and again, he's calling this kind of situation. Athletic, nimble, not how we do the traditional high. But I think what he did in wrestling would be one-on-one. we're talking about, of course, Tiger Mask, the original Satoru Sayama. His work in wrestling, this may be one of those markets where it might be a little bit old school. He's definitely a little old for me. I've only seen a handful of his matches, but his legacy, his reputation, he's one of the guys where most wrestlers weren't doing athletic, nimble stuff that are right. Discus clotheslines, there were big punches, the occasional drop kick. They weren't doing the things that you would see. There's that real classic move right now where they would strike, and the guy would put his right leg behind his opponent's left leg, and then they would bend over, and the guy in top position would basically hold it a little bit, and the guy in bottom position would basically be doing a bridge. At the time, that was really technically sound, and it was something that only Vikings were doing. Something Tiger Mask did a lot of. Nowadays, you'll see guys who are 60 because they've just gotten more confident as athletes the longer we've gone on, and the bigger guys have gotten. They've also gotten as small guys. Well, why would they're doing the things they do? We've gotten bold and daring with how we control our bodies. So, what may not be high time we're trying to go with the infamous first Tiger Mask. Historically, I do not believe you did not specifically, but if you're coming up with a list of all-time greats, you can't not have Tiger Mask. The dude was today, and his impact culturally on the sport, specifically Japan, but also famous. He was black acting Eddie Guerrero into the forefront. Eddie was like a black before. Plus, so many guys like Owen Hart have something as some but you can't someone who knows wrestling who's Indian doesn't look at Tiger as I don't know if he would make the number one spot on the list. But I think culturally and relevantly to how the industry evolved, he had to. It's just too not to.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, it's talking about innovators. Some of the stuff that we see over here, we see over there first, and I came in and watched a lot of Tiger Mask stuff later, but it's like, again, it's one of those things like the fundamentals got to start somewhere, and he's one of those guys that put that. I think obviously that legacy of that mask has a long lineage to it. As you know kind of enlightened me a lot to when we were talking about the AAA of it all and the pentagons and the hexagons of it all, which
Yeah, an octagon.
Yeah, which could be they feel like their own series of films, but those stores. But yeah, you got to get those guys like Tiger Mask and Juice and Thunder Liger their props because they really set the standard for that, and then obviously those legacies carried on so much in just Japan alone, which would then inspire so much stuff in the States to where those names that would get inspired would go to Japan to, solidify those skills. A lot of Ospreys, Ricochets, what have you, finally got styles in Japan and whatnot, even though that was years after, he put himself on the map with his high flying ability. He was still got inspired by so many of those guys. So yeah, I think, this is a great list. Obviously, like you said, just kind of spitballing here, but this is a great list because you have to put the real innovators at the top of it because everything trickles down and makes sense the other way. So, you got to give props to those guys. And the fact that they were going as long as they were, obviously you see that a lot in Japan, probably more so than you do in the States, but I think it says a lot that not only were they still going, also their legacy still held up. And like you said, sometimes masks get passed down and they're interchangeable, but the standard that still stands.
Agreed. And if you look at Tiger Mask, two things. One, his big pipeline. So again, not exactly in the 70s. He also the only for about maybe his early 30s from wrestling. He would come back in his 40s. But there was a good, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year window. He didn't from 85 to 94. It didn't take a single. So, like, think about that. The man quite literally wrestled 8 years and established a genre of wrestling that was copied and recopied time and time again. Sure. Like everything that that gets copied from Tiger Mask was arguably from 1977, I would say, which is just a whole year in wrestling. Everything that people have borrowed and stolen from him, that was 7 year window. Remarkable. Now he did come back and wrestle far more often starting in '94, but he would only ever wrestle max 20 matches, and he wasn't the same innovator he was. Granted, he was in it, but yeah, not an official list. I don't know where Saito Sayama would fall on a top 10 list. I would just say that historically, given what he can bring, he would have to be involved in some degree at the top, in to just what he did historically. But again, I don't think that over time. So with that being said, though, I think that takes us to the end of the show. Mark, anything that popped up that you want to mention real quickly, or are you good?
All good on my end. What about you?
I'm good on my end. We'll see what next week brings. We are looking at doing a deep dive into the DiBiase. It's going to be the entire show. We're not going to. Whenever we do the show, it's going to be specific discussion of DiBiase, from Ted Jr. to Brett. And have a real honest conversation about where we are involved on Ted and Ted Jr.'s legal cases because they were both indicted in Mississippi drama. So we'll talk about that's one of American Pro Wrestling's great. Don't know if it'll be next week. It's going to be like a real earnest video that we do. Everything if you watch any, but a lot of what we do is kind of like it's functional. It does a lot of great video. But anyway, just like, hey, I'm Durant. This one's gonna be. We're gonna try some stuff out and see how it flows and goes. That'll be coming next week too. If we don't next week, we'll likely just have a standard show. We'll be hitting pretty hard. It's gonna be a fun show, and I'm excited. And hopefully, what we'll do is we'll do a show once a month, and it'll be a bigger, more. For that, we're done though. Be social medias at Twitter. It is PAAOX.
That's me.
You can also find them on other podcasts, The True Parenting Show, TRUEPNYSH. You guys have been watching more Noah recently. Are you guys still on the Noah kick? I think we lost Marty for a moment.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right. So you guys have been watching Noah on you guys still following the Noah drama? No.
Now, I caught some stuff off the show we talked about with Daga. And my end is more so been Marigold, but what's going on with the Noah of it all?
There's not really any drama. I just know you guys have to watch Noah.
Yeah.
All right. Check them out there on their other podcasts. It's the True Penny Show, TruePennyShow. They do good stuff. You can find me on Twitter at Chad Nerdcorp, ChadNerdcorp, and on my Instagram at Chad's Photos, HOTHUT. You can also find us on the website, realnerdcorp.com, REALNERDCRP.com. We'll be back next Tuesday for another edition. Be sure to follow us our actual website at NERDCRP. And other than that, we're all set. We'll see you guys on Chad. And thanks for checking us out. As always,